Story 1. Around 2006, I was driving a flatbed and picked up a load of construction material, drywall, and roofing. I don't remember, but it was pre-packaged in boxes, and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load in rural Tennessee. Memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the MS, AL, and TN state lines. A tarp was required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. Found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a shitty job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load, and start unrolling the tarps again. And I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him because I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarps set in place and am climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on. This dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working, just in case. 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets to me and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as fuck, like he tried to cut his hair and had a seizure in the process and said fuck it, good enough to party. The next thing I noticed was his eyes, which I can only describe as off. Like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything. But it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. His clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes, because I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah, man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear there's no pride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continues on his way, stops at about the driver's door on my truck, turns around, comes back to me, and repeats himself, "I've got a long walk." At this point, I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance, and all that. Apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around, and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around, heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and climb into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone. He's talking to his fucking hand, and now I'm nervous. 'Cause he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face, with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I look in the mirror and there's no one there. Story 2. My friend drove for a few years a while back. He told me he was driving a rig very late at night in Utah, driving on a lesser-used 2-lane highway. He said he remembers feeling very alert that night. So he noticed what appeared to be a figure manifesting up ahead on the dark road. Told me it wasn't on the road, but just next to it. He then comes to a stop and grabs his heavy-duty flashlight and points it at the figure. He then describes it. This humanoid creature had a dead coyote it was eating, and the truck had gotten its attention and pissed it off. So it sort of stands up so he can get a full view of the thing. It was giant, with very big eyes, and of course the coyote blood all over its face. Its height was about 6.2, and it had skinny limbs and no clothing. He then describes how it started to shuffle slowly towards the truck. Not only does he not have a weapon at that time, but the only usable weapon, his flashlight, is actively helping him view this creature. He decides to book it and leave, had no problem passing it. Turned around to see it standing in the middle of the road on 2 legs as he drove away. When he reaches the nearest rest stop, he sees two other truckers talking. My friend wasn't the only one to see the thing. Both the two guys looked as horrified as he was. As for my opinion on my friend's encounter, I have to say that my friend isn't one to lie. So his story had me intrigued. I told him maybe what he saw was some mentally ill person out there. But he brushed the idea off, saying he knew what he saw wasn't human. I'm not the superstitious type, but his story did creep me out. Story 3. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains, Minnesota area. One night, around 2, I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat, like flat. There also tend to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was two people, laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move. Not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the shit out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people on the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I gotta keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Story 4. I was driving on a cross-country road trip through the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when I had one of my tires blow out. I pulled over and went to call 8AA, but I had no service on my phone. So I got out and started the process of trying to change the tire myself. After a very short while, a cop pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said, "Yes, thank you, officer," and he said, "'Cause you're in luck. I just so happen to know the best tow truck driver. He could take you into town and you could get all fixed up no problem." The mosquitoes were eating me alive, and frankly, I only had a donut-style replacement tire and no clue how to properly change it. So I said, "Yes, please," and the officer gave the tow truck a call. After another short while, the tow truck arrived, and the officer left. The driver asked, "Where am I towing you to?" So I was like, "I'm not sure. To town, I guess. Somewhere where I can get my tire fixed." He said, "Well, you're in luck, 'cause I know the guy at the only place that's open right now who can fix that for you." I said, "Okay, sounds good," and he towed us to the auto repair place. This was basically a ghost town, if you could even call it a town. The tow truck driver and the repair guy sat around and bullshitted for a couple of hours while my tire was being fixed. Bear in mind there was nobody else there but me and my passengers. There was nobody else anywhere within sight. The town was empty except for the gas station connected to the repair place. Finally, they came out and said I was all set and gave me both my bills, one for the repair and one for the tow. $1,200 in total. For one tire and a 5-mile tow. For a 1991 Grand Am, that wasn't even worth that much. I was furious but had no options, so I gave him my credit card and he was like, "Sorry guy, we're a cash-only kind of townie, hey." I was like, "Okay then, well I don't have any cash on me, so how we gonna settle this up then?" And he was like, "Well, you're in luck, 'cause there's an ATM next door at the gas station my buddy owns." So I went to the gas station and took out the maximum I could on 3 on 4 different cards, each with a $20 withdrawal fee. I looked behind the counter, and in addition to the gas station attendant, there stood the cop, the tow truck driver, and the repair guy all munching on Doritos and having a good laugh. I'm pretty sure I got hosed and potentially maybe even sabotaged. Looking back, that cop sure arrived really quickly, and my other 3 tires were all still relatively new. I had to cut my trip short and invest in cortisone cream for the million mosquito bites. Story 5. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right and saw a woman with a Miss Trunchbull bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he knows how to reach the car, pulls off at the next exit, and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks, fuck this, and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing. Misunderstanding. Better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc., and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. About 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, the same Miss Trunchbull hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window. So my dad pulls over into a lay-by and calls the police. They have received 3 other calls about the same woman car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is, unfortunately, anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence, who knows. Story 6. I was driving a bus made out of a truck in the deserts of Central Australia. I was over 500 kilometers from the nearest town. So yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. So I was out on a 5-day charter to pick up a bunch of Aboriginal elder women to go and get their women's business health checks done, pap smears, mammograms, etc., I believe. On the day I took them to get that done, we went via a place called Mintabi so they could shop in the clothing and whatever store that's randomly in this little opal mining area of South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3 or so hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day I'd take them back to their respective desert communities. The passengers all fell asleep as they'd had a very long day, as had I, but that's my job. Even the nurse who was traveling with us fell asleep. So there's me, all alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck-derived bus, my 30 passengers all sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab, and it was around 9 p.m. Up ahead in the distance I see a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road. So I dip my lights so the spotlights go off and adjust to see only what the low beam will show me. I drive down into a slight dip of a dry creek bed, expecting to see the car with only one headlight anytime shortly. It's nothing unusual to see a car with only one headlight out there, so I'm not even remotely bothered. As I come out of the dip, I put my spotlights and high beams back on, and there is no car, no nothing, just the empty dirt road. There is no dust in the air, and I can see a good distance in front of me and out to each side. There was nothing there, just the empty desert, the dirt road, and me alone in the cab. I keep the lights all on until we come to a stop about an hour later. I didn't see any cars or anything for the rest of the journey. Before I let the passengers out, I ask if any of them saw the light, and they all go dead silent after a short, while they start talking in their language, Pichanchachara and Yankunichachara, hurriedly, and then they all get off the bus. A few minutes later, a couple of the ladies came up to me to ask me to tell them exactly what I saw, without leaving anything out, and to describe exactly where I saw it. Now I'm a big guy. I've lived on 3 continents. I've been a police officer, a teacher, a bus and coach driver, a truck driver, all sorts of things. Let's just say that I'm pretty skeptical, but I do have an open mind. I'm not scared by much in this world. After I told these ladies everything from start to finish and described in minute detail exactly where it happened, I took note of exactly how far out we were when it happened. The 2 ladies looked at me with the whites showing in their eyes. They looked spooked, and they said, and I'll never forget the way they said it, I got on great with the indigenous people of Central Australia, and I trust that I know when something rattles them. They said, driver, we are so lucky that you did not stop, because if you did, no one would have seen any of us ever again. We'd all be gone. I asked why, and they just shook their heads and said to not talk about it because it had scared all the ladies. I'm sure many people have heard about the Min Min lights in Western Queensland. Well, whatever I saw in our location, they were convinced that it wasn't something you wanted to meet in the desert at night. I only ever saw this once. I only saw it for maybe a minute, and it just looked like a car headlight a couple of kilometers away up the road. But I'll tell you what, if the ladies that come from this area and whose people have survived in this desolate, remote part of the continent for 60,000 years, are worried to the point of all being scared. I certainly don't want to mess with whatever it is. Story 7. The best creepy thing that ever happened to me as I was heading from Tucson, AZ, up into Salt Lake City, UT. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood and was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now, this was in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was like 40 miles away, so it was completely pitch black outside once I turned the lights off. Anyway, around 4 I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is 6 inches from where my head is at, but on the outside of the cab. Then I felt something climb onto the landing that was on the back of my truck, and it shook my whole truck, so I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide the F awake and I want to get this thing away from me, so I slam my hand into my cab wall, trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam hard enough to make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. Story 8. I've seen some rather screwed up stuff over the years. From bad wrecks, drug addicts, panhandlers, and more. There used to be a small rest area in North Dakota on US 52 at the intersection of ND 30 near Sikeston. I came out of the building after using the facilities and got ready to leave. As I was starting to pull out, a guy opened his car door. The angle was just right to see that he was buck naked. Then he gets out of his car and starts walking around the car. I'm not sure if he was a druggie or just thought, this is a good way to pick up a truck driver I've never met before. I just drove away and didn't look back. Maybe that isn't creepy in the sense that OP meant it, but I thought it was. One story that was creepy to me was that I was driving across Kansas on I-70 and headed west. There is a pretty long stretch out there that's just a couple of little towns and not much else. As the night wore on, I realized I had been passed several times by this beat-up old motorhome. Several people sat with their noses almost pressed to the window, watching me with creepy interest as they passed. Every time, and I never noticed where I repassed them. A couple of times I swear they passed me twice where there were no rest areas or exits to pull off at. I would have seen them stopped somewhere, but yet here they were passing me again. They all looked like some variant of Charles Manson or some other freaky type. Had me pretty uptight by the time I got to the TA truck stop in Lyman and stopped for the night, and almost every driver I know has seen stuff late at night that just can't be explained. Maybe it's fatigue, or maybe not. But I've seen very large man-like shadows cross the roadway too fast for their size several times. I ain't saying it's a Bigfoot. Never got a clear view. Was always out at the end of the headlights where I couldn't be entirely sure I had ever seen anything, but it sure looked like a large something. Crossing a whole road in just a couple of steps. Weird. Story 9. I'm an OO, owner-operator, OTR, over-the-road trucker. In my time driving across your tribe, probably the freakiest encounter I had was going through Cabbage Pass in Oregon. Let me set the scene. It's dark and late fall in 2016. I'm coming from Florida with a load of beer, headed to Portland, OR. It's about 2 a.m. and it's cold out. I had just left a truck stop in Utah on I-84. I can't remember the name of it, but it has a Thunderbird as its logo and is probably on or very near a reservation. My wife and I had just gotten something to eat and were in the driver's lounge, enjoying our extremely late lunch. This is a common thing in the industry. Anyway, we get done and head back to my tractor. Everything seems like any other night. We get going and get into the pass. This is where things get strange. Ahead of me in the distance is another trucker. He's not moving fast. My guess was a heavy load like mine. It's starting to snow a bit. As I'm putting up the pass, I get close enough to see the company logo. It's a Prime Inc. rig. In my head, I'm thinking, that explains the slug pace up the mountain. As close as I can get, I can't seem to pass him. A few turns up the pass and somehow I lost sight of him. Didn't think much of it at the time. The downside is the next couple of turns he probably hit the grade and coasted down. Whatever. I get to the Oregon side of the pass and hit the pilot down there. The wife needs the toilet. We get stopped and head inside. I didn't see any Prime trucks in the lot. Figured he just kept going, until I heard a Swift driver talking. He was saying a Prime driver was trying to run him off the road. Just about that time, an older driver starts talking. About 10 years before I even got my CDL, a Prime driver went over the pass near the top. A purple and black tractor. Well, damn. I saw a purple-black Prime tractor on the pass. Coincidence has to be. I say as much and the older driver gives me a look. "Did you pass him?" asked the driver, to which I said I couldn't. He got pale. Now I'm getting antsy. The hell? Okay, driver, what the fuck is going on? A purple-black Prime goes over the pass. What happened? Seems he lost control when he hit black ice and went off the top of the pass. He died. People have been seeing that tractor going up the pass and not seeing it on the other side. Anywhere. Now I'm officially done with this conversation and was going to leave when the driver asked if my CB was on. Well, no. It's 2 in the morning and my wife was sleepy. Be kind of rude. The older driver tells me that probably saved our lives. A few weeks beforehand, a fatality accident happened on the pass, at the top, on black ice, after talking to a driver on the CB. That was all the provocation I needed to never go over Cabbage Pass again. A ghost trucker? No fucking thanks. We're a hard group of people to spook, but when our lifelines become liabilities, that's unsettling. I didn't get a lot of sleep for a couple of days. That shit freaked me out. Story 10. Not a truck driver, but a rural sheriff's deputy in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. We had 2 of us who patrolled almost 500 miles of road, and it wasn't uncommon for weird shit to happen. These are the ones that I still can't explain. On patrol one night around 2 a.m., going down a pitch-black, no-moon, country road. I'm traveling about 60-ish miles an hour and I come to a set of small rolling hills. I go down the first hill, back up, back down, and as I get to the bottom, there is a person right in front of my car. It looked like an old woman in a white gown. I know it sounds like every scary movie, but this is what happened. And I knew I was going to hit her. I locked up the brakes and she was dead center of my cruiser about 10-15 feet out. I braced for impact, and I guess I locked up the brakes so hard that old Crown Vic, the car, fishtailed at the last minute. She passed right beside my door and window. I could have reached out and grabbed her. Of course, it all happened so fast that it was a blur with no features on the person. I stop. Thank God I didn't kill some poor old woman who wandered out of her house. And you guessed it, she was gone. And to top it off, this was right next to an old church and cemetery. I looked and yelled and never saw the woman again. Eventually, I got creeped out and just left. I have no idea what the hell happened. There are no houses within miles of this church and cemetery. The second story, a few years later or before, I can't remember at this point, it was decades ago. The same part of the county. Not that far away, just a few miles down that same exact road. Similar time of night, on patrol, I was coming up to a giant straight stretch of the road that contained a 4-way intersection. I see headlights approaching me and I slow down to come to a stop at the intersection. I realize after a few seconds the headlights are just sitting in the roadway about 100 or 150 yards away. Strange, but not the weirdest thing. It could be a drunk. I start driving up to see what's happening and the headlights go out. So I stop for a second and wonder what F is happening. The lights come back on. I sit there for a second, and both lights elevate about 10-12 feet off the ground, and then come together to form a single bright light. At this point, I'm starting to feel my skin crawl. The light immediately goes out. I turn all of my lights on and go down the road and try to figure out what it is I just saw. I came across nothing. No cars, farming equipment, nothing. There's no way whatever was on that road could have gotten around me or turned around and left without me seeing them. To this day, I have no clue what those lights were.